Peace be upon you, dear brothers and sisters. A devastating wildfire has been raging through Los Angeles for weeks, rapidly expanding its reach from the city's forested outskirts to broader areas of California. Reports indicate that the flames, initially concentrated around Los Angeles County, have now advanced dangerously close to parts of Las Vegas. Exhausted firefighting teams have struggled to contain the blaze, facing severe water shortages and harsh environmental conditions. In an effort to save precious potable water, authorities have explored using seawater, but logistical hurdles and ecological concerns have slowed this plan. Crews from neighboring regions have convoyed in with tanker trucks full of water, yet the relentless fire shows little sign of abating. In the midst of this chaos, an extraordinary incident occurred. A miracle, some have called it, causing a firefighter to rethink his entire belief system. By the end of this catastrophe, he would undergo a profound spiritual transformation, embracing Islam after witnessing events he could neither explain nor ignore. According to initial news coverage, the wildfire started in the mountainous regions surrounding Los Angeles, possibly sparked by extreme heat or a stray ember. What was once a localized blaze rapidly consumed thousands of acres of woodland, jumping roads, and fire breaks with frightening speed. Eventually, the fire overwhelmed farmland and residential neighborhoods. Firefighters describe being overwhelmed by the sheer ferocity of the flames, often battling scorching temperatures and choking smoke for days on end. Worse yet, the drought afflicting much of the region limited the availability of fresh water. To protect essential drinking supplies, state officials considered piping in seawater, a desperate measure underscoring the gravity of the crisis. Much of the city lay under a pall of ash. Streets normally bustling with life were deserted as residents fled, hoping to outrun the expanding inferno. Among the first responders dispatched to this disaster was a seasoned firefighter who had come from another city with his crew. For more than 2 weeks, he and his colleagues raced from one hotspot to the next, dousing flames and rescuing anyone trapped by the blaze. He recounts how, at the start of his deployment, he thought he had braced himself for the horrors of a large-scale wildfire. Yet nothing prepared him for the heartbreak he would endure on a rural farm where the owners kept hundreds of animals. The land was covered in dry vegetation, an ideal tinder that accelerated the blaze's spread. Though the firefighters removed as much flammable material as possible, they could not move all the livestock in time. The animals panicked under the heat, their frantic cries echoing across the field. Despite pouring water and chemical retardants, the flames, spurred by high winds, reached the farm. Looking on, the firefighter saw a horrifying scene. Sheep, goats, and cattle caught in a swirling sea of embers. Their cries soon diminished. Overwhelmed by the sight of living creatures engulfed in flames, he tried to rescue some, but his fellow firefighters urged him to withdraw, insisting that nature was simply unstoppable. Though he knew their warnings were practical, he felt a deep sense of helplessness, standing by as creatures perished. This grim tableau was merely the beginning of his nightmares. In a residential area also threatened by the fire, he and his crew encountered a collapsed house with signs of life beneath the debris. Faint screams hinted that someone was trapped. The voice, the firefighter surmised, belonged to an individual of Christian faith, as they were calling on their God for deliverance. With the blaze roaring around them, the rescuers attempted to quench the flames enough to reach the victim. Yet by the time they managed to push back the inferno, the trapped person had succumbed. Removing the charred rubble, they found the remains reduced to little more than bones, the flesh completely incinerated and the skeleton itself rendered brittle. Witnessing this up close left the firefighter shaken to his core, haunted by the realization that even their best efforts could fail. He slumped to the ground, reeling from despair, his mask streaked with soot and tears. Every new day brought another set of horrors, from blackened fields littered with silent forms to once cozy homes now reduced to twisted piles of ash. Despite feeling drained, the firefighter still clung to hope. Of the Jewish faith, he prayed as often as his grueling schedule allowed, imploring his God for relief from the tragedy unraveling around him. But the blaze persisted. After nearly 2 weeks of constant effort, he and his team were sent to yet another area, somewhere in California that had reportedly been 90% engulfed by fire. Upon arrival, they discovered a scene of near total destruction. Among the ruins stood a small house identified as belonging to a Muslim family. Flames were visibly creeping toward it. The firefighters debated their plan, and as they drew nearer, they heard a child screaming in Arabic, a language foreign to most of them. The child's voice suggested she was desperately praying for salvation. The firefighter was determined to help, but one of his colleagues scoffed, citing religious differences. He remarked bitterly that since many of their own had already perished, why risk their lives for people of a different faith? This response cut the firefighter deeply, stirring a moral conflict within him. Determined to act, he ignored his colleagues' dismissive words and advanced on the burning house. Over the roar of flames, he yelled to the child, promising he would try to save her. Grabbing the fire hose, he directed a forceful stream of water at the blaze licking the walls, hoping to buy enough time to reach the occupants. Tragically, before he could fully extinguish the flames, the building collapsed, the support beams failing with a deafening crash. In that moment, the child's high-pitched scream pierced the air, and he heard her exclaim, "Allahu Akbar," words he had never before experienced in such a terrifying context. As the dust settled, he was left trembling, unsure whether the child had survived or been crushed beneath the rubble. Summoning his courage, he pushed forward. Even after the building's collapse, he could still make out the faint cry of Allahu Akbar emerging from the burning wreckage. Stripping off heavy debris piece by piece, he refused to surrender to the smoke and scorching heat. Eventually, he spotted a small figure lying amid the ruins, a young girl, possibly 8 or 10 years old. To his astonishment, she was alive, apparently untouched by the inferno. Nearby rubble still smoldered, but the flames seemed to have parted around her. When he lifted her, he noticed she was clutching a book tightly against her chest. Overcome with relief, he carried her outside and realized the book was the Quran. Sobbing with a mixture of terror and joy, the girl repeatedly thanked Allah, convinced that God had sent this man to save her. The firefighter marveled at the child's profound faith. In his own experience, people facing imminent death sometimes curse their deities in despair. But this girl had never wavered. Her confidence in divine intervention shook him more than the raging fires ever could. Later, the firefighter discovered that the girl's parents were away when the fire spread to their neighborhood. Roads were blocked by embers, and they could not return in time. That meant she had been alone, with only her Quran for comfort, confronting the possibility of a slow, agonizing demise. The child's unwavering conviction left the firefighter questioning everything he thought he knew about life, death, and faith. He had watched humans and animals alike succumb to merciless flames. He had witnessed people from multiple faiths calling out for help, often descending into curses when rescue did not come in time. Yet this young Muslim girl displayed a depth of devotion that transcended any terror or pain she might have felt. In that surreal moment, amid the ashes of what had once been a home, the firefighter felt something profound shift inside him. Once the girl was safe in an emergency shelter, the firefighter remained by her side, disturbed by the apathy he had witnessed in some of his colleagues. Reflecting on how he had nearly let prejudice keep him from saving an innocent life, he realized he could not ignore the spiritual stirring in his heart. Hearing the child whisper, "Alhamdulillah," thanking God for her deliverance, moved him in ways his former prayers never had. Consumed by this feeling, he asked her to guide him in understanding Islam. With tears in her eyes, the girl explained what little she could, repeating that Allah had undoubtedly protected her. Their conversation was brief and simple, but it contained enough sincerity to ignite a profound transformation in the firefighter. Subsequently, when local volunteers arrived, they saw the firefighter with the girl, both covered in grime and soot, yet clutching the Quran. Overcome by emotion, he told them, "I want to embrace Islam. Please teach me the words." The volunteers, themselves shaken by the scale of destruction, gently guided him through the Shahada, the Muslim profession of faith. A hush fell over the makeshift shelter as people realized what was happening. This courageous man, who had risked his life to save a child, now found himself newly devoted to a religion he had scarcely understood days before. Word of the firefighter's conversion spread quickly among the exhausted crews. Some celebrated his decision, while others reacted with indifference or even open hostility. In a disaster scenario, tensions often run high, and not everyone welcomes such a sudden change. Nevertheless, the firefighter felt an unshakable sense of peace. Even as fresh blazes erupted in nearby hills, he continued his work, confident he had found a guiding truth in the midst of chaos. In interviews after the fire eventually subsided, the firefighter recounted his story in a calm, reflective tone. He emphasized how the unflinching faith of one child could alter the life of a grown man. He recounted the harrowing scenes, the farm animals he could not save, the charred remains of a person who cried out to God in vain, the burned-out neighborhoods reduced to ashes. Yet, he stressed, the pivotal moment was witnessing a little girl refusing to abandon her belief, even as flames rose around her. Over the following weeks, local media outlets reported that the region's wildfires had finally been contained, thanks to a combination of diminishing winds, cooler temperatures, and the perseverance of numerous firefighting teams. The aftermath left entire neighborhoods in ruins, thousands of people displaced, and countless animals lost. Charities and relief organizations arrived to offer shelter, food, and clothing, while state governments vowed to rebuild. Meanwhile, the girl's family, upon learning that she had been saved, rushed to the shelter, relieved to find her alive and unharmed. They offered tearful thanks to the firefighter who had risked everything to rescue her. In a brief gathering, the family warmly accepted his newfound faith, regarding him as an honored guest. Reports suggest that the two remain in contact, forging a bond that transcends traditional barriers. The firefighter acknowledged that, although the tragedy claimed many lives, it also granted him a spiritual rebirth. He noted that we often find moments of grace in the darkest situations, and that real faith can manifest itself in the unlikeliest places. For him, seeing the unshakable conviction of a child was enough to lead him down a path he never considered before.